in the heart of the frozen north, where the sky held the stars like a grandmother cradles sleeping children. There was a village that had almost forgotten how to dream. Its homes were half buried in snow. Its rivers slept beneath thick sheets of ice. The people there still sang songs to the gods of old, but not as prayers, only as habits. Their eyes were weary. Their stories had grown short, except for one boy, Sigurd. He was not large, nor loud, nor bold. He did not throw axes like the others. He did not boast of strength or glory. But when the snow fell thickest, and the wind howled through the wooden slats of his small room, he listened, and one night the snow whispered back. He was 14 the first time he saw the dream. It came in silence, the way winter always comes without asking. He stood in a vast white field, endless in every direction. Not a tree, not a rock, just snow, falling softly, always falling. And then from the center of the field came light, not sunlight, not fire, a blue flame, steady and slow, suspended above the ground, floating in place as if it were breathing. Not warm, not cold, just calm. He stepped closer, and as he reached for it, he heard a voice. Not loud, not sharp. It came like wind through pine trees. Remember what was lost. He woke with snowflakes in his hair, inside his own home, with the hearth long, cold, and silence sitting in the room beside him like an old friend. The dream returned every few weeks after that. Always the same field, always the flame, always the voice. He told no one, not his older brother, who was too busy training for raids, not the elders, who would have scowled and told him to chop more wood. But he began to wander farther outside the village when he could, into the woods, across the frozen river, up toward the foothills. Listening, waiting, and once, just once, he found something. It was a stone, tall, dark, half buried in ice, carved with runes so ancient he couldn't read them. But they felt familiar. When he placed his hand upon it, the wind stopped completely. Not a sound, not a breath. The trees held still. The world hushed, and just for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of blue light beneath the ice. Then it was gone, and he was alone again. Winter deepened, and so did his silence, while other boys hunted elk or boasted of battles yet to come. Sigurd sat beside old Grettir, the blind storyteller, and listened, not just to tales of gods and giants, but to the pauses between the words, to the sighs, the silences, the grief no one dared name. You hear things others don't, Grettir told him once, fingers curled around a carved staff. That can be a blessing, or a burden. Sigurd only nodded. He didn't want to be special. He just didn't want to forget. One night, during the Festival of Frost, he saw the flame while awake. The villagers were drinking, dancing, shouting into the night air. Sigurd slipped away from the fire circle and walked to the edge of the woods. And there, it was floating just above the snow, flickering slow, blue soft. It didn't light the trees. It didn't burn the air. It simply waited. He stepped toward it, but this time, no voice spoke, only the sound of breath, his own and something more. Another breath, older, deeper, like the mountain itself was breathing with him. Then the flame drifted away through the trees, up the slope, toward the north, toward the ridge, toward the old paths no one took anymore. The next morning he packed quietly, only his cloak, a pouch of dried fish, a bone-handled knife, a flintstone, and a single carved rune, Onstus, the rune of breath and speech. He left before dawn, no goodbyes, no goodbyes, no explanations, only the flame in his mind, and the silence in his chest. The path north was not kind. The snow deepened, the wind cut. Wolves followed from a distance, their eyes golden in the dusk. But he did not turn back. He climbed ridges where no fire had burned in centuries, crossed frozen rivers where the ice groaned beneath his steps like sleeping giants shifting in their dreams. And, always, the flame appeared just ahead, drifting, waiting, never calling, never commanding Dot, just inviting Dot. On the fourth night, he reached the mountain. Dot, Svarthol, Black Hollow, no. One had climbed it in a generation. Some said it was cursed, others said it was sacred. Most just said, don't go. But Sigurd stood at its base and breathed deep. The air here was different, colder but cleaner. And as he stepped onto the old trail, he saw something carved in the rock, faint, half worn but still there. Irsa, a name, not just a name. A presence someone had come before. Someone had walked this path once. Someone who had also followed the flame. And so, Sigurd climbed. Asterisk, the path was narrow and winding. Old stones jutted from the ground like teeth from a giant's jaw, each one slick with frost. The snow here was untouched, no footprints, no trails, not even from animals, as if the mountain had asked the world to leave it alone. And the world had listened. Sigurd's boots crunched gently as he walked, careful not to disturb the stillness too much. Even the birds did not sing here. The only sound was his breath, steady and slow, fogging in the cold. Above him, clouds drifted like slow ships. Below, the forest lay in shadow. But ahead, just beyond the bend, he saw it again. The flame, still blue, still calm, still waiting. He reached a ridge, where the snow was thin and the stone bare. There, a circle of flat rocks had been arranged in a rough spiral, old and moss-stained. In the center, a low, broken pillar rose like a candle without fire. Sigurd stepped into the circle, and everything changed. The wind fell silent, his heartbeat slowed, and he heard her voice. Not a voice made of sound, a voice made of memory. Walk, as one who listens. He turned. No one. The flame floated above the pillar now, flickering low, and beside it, carved into the stone, was a symbol he'd seen once in a dream. A tree, not just any tree. Its branches curled inwards. Its roots reached upward. A tree of remembering. He knelt before it, touched the stone, and again the voice, you carry silence. That is enough. He did not sleep that night. Instead, he sat beside the broken pillar, watching the flame hover in the still air. He thought of his village, of Grettir, sitting in the firelight, telling stories to no one who truly heard, of his brother sharpening weapons for wars that had not yet come, of his mother's eyes, tired before her time. And he wondered, was this journey only his, or had others come before? At dawn, he continued upward. The path narrowed further, forcing him to climb using both hands. The rocks here were sharp, shaped by wind more than time. He saw bones once half buried in ice, not human, too long, too twisted, but no fear touched him. The flame never left his sight. He crested a ridge just as the sun broke through the clouds, and there, stretched before him, was a frozen valley shaped like a bowl in the earth. Smooth, pale, perfectly still, and in its center, A mouth in the mountain. A cave.svarthol. It gaped like a forgotten memory. Its mouth was not dark, as he expected, but blue. The same glow as the flame, the same calm. He approached slowly, the snow beneath. His feet turned to ice. The wind stopped at the edge. As if unwilling to enter, Sigurd stepped inside, and the mountain swallowed him at first. The cave was narrow, just enough space to move sideways, his hand brushing cold walls that pulsed faintly with light. Not firelight, something older. He moved deeper. Each step took him further from the world above, further from sound, from warmth, from everything he thought he understood. And still he was not afraid, because the silence here wasn't empty. It was full of voices long gone, whispers without words, stories told without sound. Then the cavern opened. He stepped into a great hollow, larger than a hall, its ceiling hidden in mist. Ice coated every surface, shining like crystal. And there, in the center of the chamber, rising from the floor a column of flame dot, blue dot, bright dot, silent dot. But different from before. This was no floating flicker. This was a presence. He walked to it. The closer he got, the more he felt its rhythm slow and steady, like a heartbeat that had waited 1,000 years to be noticed. He stood before it, reached out. The flame did not burn, it did not move, but it welcomed him, and when his fingers touched it, he saw a battlefield, silent and still, a woman standing among fallen warriors, her cloak torn, her eyes wide and unblinking, a village in flames. Not from war, but from fear. Children hidden beneath floorboards, songs buried in ice, and through it all, the same blue flame dash carried protected. Remembered, he fell to his knees. Not from pain, from understanding. The flame was not just fire, it was memory, it was peace, it was listening. And then she appeared. Not from shadows, not from mist, but from silence. Itself a woman, tall and quiet, wearing armor etched with runes and a fur cloak that shimmered like moonlight on snow. Her hair was braided with bits of bone and silver. Her eyes were old, but kind. She looked at him not as a stranger, but as one she had known in another life. "You heard," she said. Sigurd nodded. His voice, when it came, was soft, earsome. She did not smile, but something in the air warmed. "I carried the flame once," she said, "as you do now." The world had changed when Sigurd stepped back into it. It was not the trees that were different, nor the snow or sky. It was the silence now. He could feel it. Every branch that creaked under frost whispered something, every gust of wind between. Stones carried the hush of forgotten names. Even his own footsteps seemed less like sound, more like rhythm, like part of a song he had never noticed before. The flame drifted beside him, small and steady, no larger than a closed fist. But its glow touched. Nothing cast, no shadow, melted, no snow. It simply existed, as if presence itself was enough. By the time he returned to the ridge, where the spiral stones stood, night had fallen. He expected wind, he expected cold, but the air was still, and in the center of the stone circle, he saw her again. Why RSA, not as before, not whole. This time she was made of flickers and fragments, like mist caught in moonlight. Her eyes remained the same sharp, wide, ancient dot. She did not speak, but the flame at his side pulsed once, and Sigurd understood this was not a vision, it was a remembering. The cavern had not given him power. It had opened a door, Now the stories were coming through. Yrsa moved around the stones slowly, her feet not touching the ground. As she circled, each stone lit with faint blue runes he could not read, but felt in his bones. Those who listen will carry the fire. Not fire to burn, not fire to destroy, but fire to remember, fire to keep the silence alive. And as her final steps completed the circle, her form faded, but the stones kept glowing, and the flame at Sigurd's side grew. A little brighter, he knelt and placed both hands on the frozen earth. He did not pray, he did not speak. He simply listened, and the mountain whispered back in the days that followed. Sigurd did not return home. Not yet. He followed the path down into the hidden valleys behind Sva, places no one had visited in generations. He found ruins swallowed by snow, walls covered in moss and ice, where once there had been villagers, and he listened each night. The flame told him stories, not in words, but in dreams. He saw a child hiding beneath a table, clutching a wooden carving of a wolf. He saw a woman lighting candles alone, waiting for someone who would never return. He saw a fire pit in an empty longhouse, still warm, though no one had lived there for years. These were not his memories, but they trusted him, and so he carried them. One evening, as the sky turned silver, and the first stars blinked open above the pines, he heard a song, faint, broken, like wind through a cracked flute. He followed it, over a ridge, through a ring of stone, pillars half sunk in the snow, and there, beside a frozen stream, sat a girl, no older than him, barefoot, wrapped in a fur cloak too large for her. She was humming, eyes closed, face turned to the sky, and beside her, her tiny flame, just like his. He stopped. Not out of fear, but recognition. Her eyes opened, and when they met his, something passed between them. Not greeting, not surprise, but understanding. You hear them too? She asked. He nodded. What do they say to you? He whispered. She smiled not with her mouth, but with her eyes. They don't say anything. They just are. And sometimes that's enough. Her name was Solveig. She came from a village, farther east, beyond the deep fjords. She had seen the flame in her dreams as well. She had followed it alone, up another path, through another cave. But the stories were the same. Yrsa had spoken to her too, and now she wandered, as he did, not seeking, not fleeing, simply carrying. They sat beside the stream for hours, no words, just breath, just listening. And for the first time in days, Sigurd smiled, because the silence no longer felt like solitude. They traveled together after that, two flames, two footsteps, one rhythm. In a hollow shaped like a sleeping bear, they found a pool that reflected stars even during the day. In its water, they saw the faces of those whose memories they carried, children, warriors, elders, storytellers. Solveig said the pool was called Viva's Mirror. Whose year? Sigurd asked. An old goddess, she said, one who never spoke, only listened. They stayed beside the mirror for 3 days, and in that time, the flames grew, not in size, but in depth. They pulsed together now, soft, steady, like two hearts in the same chest. On the 4th morning, Sigurd woke with a single word in his mind: return. He looked to Solveig. She nodded before he spoke. We have to bring it back, he said. Not to teach, she replied. Not to rule, he added. To remember. They said together, and so they turned toward the world they had left behind. Not as children, not as warriors, but as bearers of silence, of story, of something older than gods, and quieter than time. Asterisk, they walked for 5 days beneath skies of shifting silver. The sun no longer warmed the snow. It only lingered low, casting long shadows that seemed to follow them, like old memories, unsure if they were welcome. Sigurd and Solveig did not speak much. They didn't need to. Their breath, their footsteps, the soft flickering of the twin flames beside them, these became their language. On the 6th night, they camped at the edge of an ancient forest. The trees here grew taller than any they had seen, their trunks wide as houses, their bark dark and smooth like old bone. And that night the flame spoke, not in voices, not in visions, but in music. It came slowly, like a song remembered from childhood, a melody without words, a lullaby hummed by a grandmother long gone. Sigurd sat up, heart still. Solveig was already awake, eyes wide. The flames between them spun gently in the air, circling one another like birds in flight. Their blue light shimmered across the snow, casting no shadow, and from the trees came a low, steady rhythm boom. Boom, boom, like the heartbeat of the earth or something beneath it. They followed the sound into the woods. The trees parted, without wind, and then, in a clearing where no snow had fallen, they saw her again. YRSA, more clear than ever before. She stood in the center of a stone circle tall, radiant, her fur cloak billowing though no breeze stirred. But this time she was not alone. Around her stood 12 other figures, men, women, old, young, all holding small flames in their hands. Their eyes shone not with fire but memory. They were not ghosts, they were echoes. Sigurd stepped forward. Yrsa turned. Slowly she looked not at his eyes, but at the flame beside him, and she bowed. So did the 12. Then they spoke not with mouths, but in the space behind his thoughts we carried what the world forgot. Now it is your turn. Sigurd's lips trembled. What is it? He whispered. YRSA lifted her hand. The flame above her palm danced once, then split into dozens of tiny embers that circled her like stars. It is the memory of the quiet ones, came the reply. Those who loved but were not named. Those who wept but were not mourned. Those who sang but were never heard. Solveig's voice was soft. You were protectors. No, Yrsa said aloud, her voice like snow falling onto stone. We were listeners, and that was enough. The embers swelled faster now. They began to circle Sigurd and Solveig, warming the air not with heat but with presence. A woman's laugh, a child's hum, a grandfather whispering of blessing before sleep. All sounds too small for legends. But now they filled the clearing like starlight fills night. Then, one by one, the echoes began to fade, not vanish, fade like a candle, gently going out after its purpose has been fulfilled. Yrsa was the last. She stepped close to Sigurd, placed a hand on his shoulder. You carry us now. Then she turned to Solveig. And you will remind him when he forgets. And then she was gone. Only the circle of stones remained, and silence, true silence, not empty. Full, complete, they sat in that clearing until dawn, not moving, not speaking, because some silences must be honored, and some stories begin only after the last word is spoken. When they finally rose, the forest seemed changed, or perhaps they had changed. Even the trees seemed to bow as they passed, and when they reached the edge of the woods, they saw smoke on the horizon home. But home was not as They left it there, villagers Sigurd's to the west. Solveig's to the east had grown quieter in their absence. No raids had come that winter. No festivals had been held. It was as if the land itself was waiting, listening for them. Sigurd returned to his family's longhouse. His mother wept when she saw him, not from worry, but from relief too deep for words. His brother stared long and hard at the flame that now hovered quietly at Sigurd's shoulder. "It didn't burn you?" he asked. Sigurd smiled. "It taught me how to be still." In the nights that followed, people began to gather near Sigurd's hearth, not for tales of glory, but for something gentler. He did not call them stories, he called them rememberings. He would close his eyes, and the flame would grow brighter, and the room would fill with names, not famous names, but true ones. Solveig visited often. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she sang, and sometimes she simply sat beside the fire, her own flame casting soft blue light across the faces of the old, the forgotten, the young dot, and slowly the village began to change. People listened more, argued less, laughed softly. They carved fewer weapons and more runes, on doors, on stones, on their own hearts. The silence spread, not as fear, but as peace. And the flame grew. The village never asked what the flame truly was. They didn't need to. Its glow spoke in ways no mouth could. The children followed it like moths. Elders bowed their heads when it passed, and the animals, dogs, goats, even the restless crows grew, still in its presence. But one night, as frost coated the inside of the windows and firewood cracked with cold, the flame flickered. It had never done that before. Not in fear, not in warning, just ... a twitch, a ripple, like a ripple in a pond before a storm. And Sigurd knew something had changed. He walked outside, cloak wrapped tight, boots crunching over old snow. The flame hovered ahead, leading him past sleeping houses, across the frozen stream, and into the wood. Solveig was already there. She didn't turn to look at him, only said, "Did yours move too?" He nodded. They followed. The trees deepened, not in darkness, in age. Their trunks bore markings, runes, half-carved, half-earsed. Wind and time had tried to hide them, but the blue glow of the twin flames brought them back to life. Solveig traced her fingers across the bark of one. "It's older than the village," she said. "Older than He asked. She shook her head. "Older than memory." The path curved until they found it, a clearing they had never seen before. Though both had walked these woods many times, and in the center, Ashdod, not snow, not leaves. Ashdod, as if something had burned here long ago, but no trees were charred, no smoke lingered, just a wide, low depression in the earth filled with soft grey dust. Sigurd knelt and touched it, still warm beneath the top layer. Something hard. He brushed gently, stone flat. Carved, he cleared more ash, revealing a circle of stones beneath, just like the one on the ridgebot, older, worn smooth by centuries. And upon each stone, runes, unlike any he had seen. Solveig's breath caught. "These aren't for speaking." Sigurd looked up. "What do you mean?" She closed her eyes, hand hovering just above the runes. "They're not words, they're listings." And just then a wind rose from the ground, not cold, not biting, a remembering wind. It carried voices, not shouting, not crying, but soft, soft as a lullaby, soft as a mother singing to a child who no longer remembers the tune. The flames responded. They rose. not in height, but in brightness, shining like morning fog lit by sun dot, and from the ashes light bloomed slowly, like petals opening on a flower that only grows once every 100 winters. In that light they saw faces, hundreds, thousands, not ghosts, not spirits, but echoes of those who had once stood in this very place. They saw a boy lighting a lantern for his blind grandfather, a girl weaving feathers into a burial wreath, two lovers whispering promises in the dark, an old woman walking alone into the forest so the village wouldn't have to feed her one more winter. None of them had names in the sagas, but here they were everything. Salvig was weeping, not from sorrow, from recognition, from the unbearable beauty of knowing that nothing, no act of love, no song sung in solitude was truly lost. Not here, not to the flame. Sigurd stood and whispered, "Is this what she meant?" Salvig wiped her cheek. "Yes, this is what we carry." They sat by the ashes till dawn. Neither spoke, not because they had nothing to say, but because the silence was full of all the stories no one had asked to hear until now. The next morning they returned to the village, and the change began. Subtle, gentle children started to draw runes in the snow, not for fun, but from memory. Elders began to speak of dreams they'd forgotten they'd had, and sometimes, if the night was quiet enough, people would gather around the hearths not for tales of gods or battles, but for stillness. And in that stillness, the flame would speak. One evening, as Solveig taught the children how to listen to silence, Sigurd was visited by an old man from the next valley over. He had walked for 2 days in the snow. His hands shook, his breath rasped, but his eyes were clear. He held out a small pouch tied with bone thread. Inside, 3 smooth stones, each etched with a single rune. "I found these when I was a boy," the man whispered. "Never knew what they meant, until I heard the silence from your fire." Sigurd took them with both hands, bowed his head. "They are heard now," he said. The old man wept, and the flame glowed brighter. The flame had no temple, no throne, no priesthood. It lived in stories told softly, and silences kept respectfully. It needed no name, only keepers, carriers, listeners, and in Sigurd and Solvigit had found both. Winter deepened. The sun no longer rose above the mountains, it merely hovered, low and pale, as if reluctant to intrude. But the darkness didn't bring fear anymore. It brought sound, not loud, not constant, but real, in the quiet between breaths. Sigurd began to hear them, songs, whispers, echoes, of voices never written down, never sung in mead halls, but still alive, still waiting. And one night, as he stood at the edge of the stream, he heard a melody unlike any before, a song with no words, a hum rising from the earth itself. He followed it, not with footsteps, with heart. The flame moved ahead, flickering gently, like a firefly in mist. And in a grove where the snow had melted into soft moss, he saw them, figures. Dozens, not spirits, not memories, people, old, young, pale, dark, wrapped in fur or cloaked in shadow, sitting together in a great circle. They looked up when he approached, but did not speak at the center. An old woman stood, eyes white with blindness, hands resting. On a staff carved from driftwood, she began to hum, and the others joined her, each with a note, each different but together one song. Sigurd's flame hovered at the edge, pulsing gently. Then Solveig stepped beside him. She had followed, too, she took his hand, and they stepped into the circle. And just like that, they were singing. Not because they knew the melody, but because the melody knew them. The sound rose, not like thunder, but like dawn. Slow, golden, patient. A song of birth, dot of laughter, never remembered. Of a mother smoothing a child's hair before sleep. Of fathers who worked without praise. Of siblings who shared a crust of bread without needing thanks. The blind woman turned to Sigurd. Her eyes glowed. Softly now, like blue stars behind clouded glass. "You carry them," she said. Sigurd's voice barely made it past his lips. "Yes. And they carry you," she added. He nodded. "I don't know their names," he whispered. She smiled. They never needed names to be real. And then she reached out, touched the flame, and it changed. It split, just like Yrsa's had, into hundreds of tiny flames. They danced around the circle, touching each singer, each listener. And when they returned, they carried voices. Sigurd heard them all at once. A girl reciting a poem to no one. A fisherman thanking the sea, even as it froze round him. A wife singing to her husband long, buried. None of it was written, all of it was remembered. And the song, the nameless song, carried it all, held it like breath between snowfall. When the last note faded, the old woman stepped back. The singers stood, one by one. They walked into the trees, disappearing, but leaving the echo behind. In moss, in bark, in Sigurd. Solveig knelt, hand to the ground. "I can still hear them," she said. "You always will," said the voice. Of the flame not aloud, but deep in their chest. "This song doesn't end, it only waits." They returned to the village, and for the first time, they taught others not what to say but how to listen. Not to command silence, but to honor it. And from that silence, songs began to rise. Songs with no names, no endings, no endings. Only meaning. The children called them breath songs, because they felt like breathing, simple, essential, alive. And so the flame grew. Not in size, but in soul. It no longer belonged to Sigurd or Solveig. It belonged to everyone, and yet they remained. Its keepers, its listeners, its storytellers, in time. The villagers built no monuments, but they carved listening circles in stone. They sang without audience. They sat together in the dark, not afraid, not waiting, just being, and the flame lived on in each of them. The wind had always been a part of their world. It whistled between rooftops, sighed through pine forests, danced over the frozen lake, but it had never spoken. Not until that morning. It began as a gentle stir, barely strong enough to ruffle a raven's feathers. Sigurd sat by the hearth, tracing his finger over an old rune carved in driftwood. The children were nearby, giggling softly, drawing shapes in ash with bits of coal. Solveig was outside, teaching a young boy how to listen to snow. Then the wind stopped. Every branch froze, every breath held, and then a voice. Not loud, not deep, but old, like an echo bouncing between mountaintops for 1,000 years. It passed through the trees, the village, the stones, not shaking them, just touching them. And the flame rose, tall and still. Not dancing, not flickering. It listened, and so did they. The voice said only one word, "Remember." Then silence again. But not the kind that ends a moment. The kind that begins one. Solveig entered the longhouse, snow clinging to her cloak. "You heard it," she said. Sigurd nodded. "We all did." A girl whispered, "Was it the gods?" Sigurd smiled. "No, older. Older than the gods." The boy asked. "Yes," Solveig said gently, kneeling beside him. "Older than their names. Older than names themselves." That night, the village gathered, not for tales, not for songs, but for wind. They sat in a wide circle beneath the stars. No fire, no food, only the breath of the cold sky and the hush of snow beneath. They waited, not impatiently, not nervously, but with the kind of stillness taught only by time and truth. And the wind came. It did not howl, it whispered, and it carried more than air. It carried stories, one by one. The villagers began to feel something deep inside them stir, an image here, a scent there, a feeling they couldn't explain, as though someone had left a message in their bones long ago. A man wept without knowing why. A woman began to hum a tune no one else had heard, but everyone somehow recognized. Solveig took out a flap, stone she always kept with her, a rune carved by her mother long ago. She held it up to the wind, and it glowed, a soft blue shimmer, like moonlight on ice. The flame responded, drifting from Sigurd sighed, encircling the rune, and then a voice inside all of them, not spoken, not sung, shared. Double quotes. There are truths too old to be told, too wide to fit in words, too soft to be shouted. These truths live in wind, in breath, in silence. They listened not to remember what was said, but to remember how to listen. And in that act, they became memory the next day. Sigurd climbed the ridge alone. The wind was strong there. He let it press against him, tug his cloak, sting his cheeks, and he whispered, "I hear you." The wind paused, then gently passed through him, as though satisfied. Solveig found him sitting there hours later. "I think it speaks to all of us differently," he said. She nodded, because we carried different silences. He looked at her, then up at the sky. "What do we do with them?" Solveig smiled. "We share them, like fire, like breath." And from that day on, the villagers began a new tradition. On the coldest night of each month, they left their homes in silence. No drums, no horns, no speeches. They sat on the ridge. They closed their eyes and let the wind speak. Some wept, some laughed, some heard nothing, yet felt everything. And the flame, it no longer needed to be seen, because it now lived in every hush, every sigh, every soft song left. Unfinished, it was not a torch to be held. It was a breath to be remembered. Asterisk, it had been many moons since the flame first split by now. Nearly every home in the village held a tiny glimmer of it, not on a pedestal, not behind glass, but in open bowls of stone or wood, tended like a garden. The children no longer feared the dark. The elders no longer feared forgetting. But one morning, as Sigurd sat on the stump where he always drank his first cup of boiled pine tea, an old man arrived. He came from beyond the northern fjord, where the sea never fully froze and the gulls screamed louder than the wind. His beard was white as bone. His hands trembled not from weakness, but from something deeper expectation. "I've heard your flame listens," the man said. "It does," Sigurd replied. The man sat down across from him without asking. He drew 3 stones from a pouch. Each one had a different mark, carved by hand, smooth from decades of touch. He placed them between them like dice cast before fate. Then he asked the first question, "How do I know if I've lived well?" Sigurd did not answer. The flame beside him flickered slightly, but no wind stirred. He looked at the man and said softly, "Let's walk." They went down to the lower field, where Sigurd was showing a young girl how to listen to roots. The girl couldn't hear anything, only felt the faint pulse of the earth, like a heartbeat beneath snow. Sigurd gestured. "Do you see her?" The man nodded. "She forgets most of this lesson," Sigurd said. "But someday, in another winter, she'll know how to wait for something without name or sound." He turned to face the man. "You lived well if others can do the same." The man said nothing, only took a long, slow breath and set the first stone aside. Then he asked the second question. Where do the stories go when no one remembers them? This time, Solveig answered. She led them past the houses to the listening circle carved into stone. No one was there. Snow had gathered in the carved runes like sugar dot. She asked the old man to sit in the center. She and Sigurd sat outside the circle, then Dash silenced Ardi and Hole, the kind that presses gently on your chest, like sleep. After several minutes, the man opened his mouth to speak, but Solveig raised a hand. "Don't," she said softly. "Not yet." More silence, then a whisper, not from the trees, not from the wind, but from beneath the man. From the stone, a voice, so soft it was barely breath. "We're still here." The man wept, quietly like snow melting into roots. He placed the second stone beside the first dot, then asked the third and final question. "What happens when the last flame goes out?" Sigurd stood, walked away. Solveig followed. The man waited 10 minutes, 30, an hour. Then, slowly, he stood, walked to the river, found them there watching a fox drink from the stream. No words, just waiting. Eventually, Sigurd turned to him. "If a flame goes out, what remains?" The old man blinked. "Ash." Solveig smiled gently. "No, warmth." Sigurd nodded. "And warmth isn't flame. It's what flame leaves behind." The man's lips trembled. "But if there's no one left to feel it, then the world still remembers it," Solveig said. "Like the sun remembers fire, like silence remembers song." That night, the man didn't sleep in a house. He slept beneath the stars, and in the morning, he left the third stone with the flame in the listening hall. He did not say goodbye. He didn't need to, because now he carried the answers. The 3 questions spread through the village, not as riddles, not as tests, but as gifts. Children placed stones near the hearth and asked their own versions. Does the bird remember where it first sang? Can wind cry? Will I still be me when I grow old? No one rushed to answer. No one needed to, because the flame didn't answer with words. It answered with presence, and presence was enough. Enough to heal, enough to guide, enough to continue, and so. The village did not become a place of certainty. It became a place of questions. And in asking them, they found everything they never knew they needed. There are mountains that command, mountains that defy storms, dare thunder to break them. And then there are mountains that listen. They don't speak. They don't rise with arrogance. They wait. Sigurd first saw it on the 7th day of Thor. The ice along the river had broken into lazy shards, drifting like memories too large to carry. And in the distance, beyond the pine lines and the frozen fields, rose a shape not so much seen as felt, like a weight on the edge of thought. Not tall, not sharp, but vast. Solveig noticed it too. The mountain. He nodded. It's calling. She smiled softly. No, just listening. The villagers said no one ever reached its peak, not because it was treacherous, but because people simply stopped climbing. They reached a place they could no longer knew it was enough. So when Sigurd and Solveig set out at dawn, they didn't pack for conquest, they packed for stillness. No swords, no trophies, only bread, warm furs, and a small wooden box inside it. A single coal from the central flame, wrapped in moss, still glowing. The path wound through whispering trees and sleeping stone. They passed a cairn built from whalebones, a frozen stream singing in 3 tones, and a hollow tree that echoed back anything but what you said. As they climbed, they spoke less, not because they were tired, but because the mountain didn't require sound. It asked only presence. Midway up, they came to a shelf of smooth stone where dozens of footprints had gathered pressed into the rock, as though once molten, but these were no ordinary steps. They were pairs of prints facing each other. One set small, one set large, some fresh, some ancient. Solveig knelt beside one pair, brushing snow from its edges. It's where people forgave each other, she said softly, without needing to say the words. Sigurd touched the stone. It was warm. They left their own prints beside it side by side, then moved on as dusk settled. They reached the listening ledge. It was not marked by a sign, only by silence. So deep it pulled breath from the lungs. The wind stopped, birds ceased, even thoughts quieted. It was not oppressive, it was inviting. At the edge stood an old figure, wrapped in bark and wooled hair like frost on granite. Not man or woman, not young or old, simply there when Sigurd and Solveig stepped forward. The figure turned slowly. No smile, no frown, just eyes like still water, then a voice, as quiet as a held breath. You carry warmth, Sigurd nodded, revealing the coal box. We brought the flame. The figure gestured to a stone basin set into the ground. Let it speak. Sigurd placed the coal gently onto the center of the stone. Nothing happened at first, then a pulse, like a heartbeat beneath rock. The coal sparked, once, twice, then caught not into fire, but into light, a pale, flickering glow that shimmered across the ledge, casting no shadow. It didn't burn, it remembered, and in its glow, stories emerged, not told, revealed. They saw an old woman teaching a child how to knead bread with one hand, a hunter crying softly as he left behind his last spear, 2 brothers parting on opposite sides of the mountain, only to meet again in another. Life, no names, no timelines, only moments held gently in the light. The figure spoke again. The mountain keeps the things no one dared speak aloud. Solveig's voice was barely more than a breath. Why? So they wouldn't be forgotten. They sat for hours, no questions asked, none answered but everything known. And in the silence, the mountain listened to Sigurd's, doubts to Solveig's, buried songs to the grief they didn't even realize they carried, and the joy they had forgotten was theirs. When they finally stood to leave, the coal had faded, but the warmth remained in their skin, in their breath, in the stone beneath their feet. The figure was gone, but the prints they left remained, beside dozens of others, like petals in a memory no wind could scatter. They descended, in silence, not because they lacked words, but because they now understood. Some truths are not for speaking, only for carrying. Back in the village, they placed no marker for the journey. No one asked what they had found. They didn't need to for that winter. Everyone became a little quieter, a little slower, a little more willing to listen. and far above the mountain, remained. Not watching, not waiting, just listening. Always, asterisk. In the farthest hut of the village, just where the birches began to thin and the moss turned, blue in spring, lived a boy named Leaf. He never cried, never laughed, never made a sound, but not because he couldn't, because he was listening, always. His mother was the village harp maker, and though she strung her instruments with the finest threads of deer gut and silverwheat, none ever made a sound for Leaf. She once carved him a harp from driftwood. Touched by lightning, he plucked the string. Not a note, not a hum, only the faint echo of absence. The elders watched him. They didn't try to fix him. They knew better than to fix what wasn't broken. But some days, they worried, for how can a child grow strong if he carries no song? One evening, Sigurd sat beside Leaf at the riverbank. The boy was drawing loops in the frost with a raven feather. Sigurd asked gently, "What do you hear when the wind doesn't speak?" Leaf looked at him, then looked away. After a long pause, he whispered everything. That night, the flame in Sigurd's hearth rose tall. No wind, no wood added dot, just rose that flickered thrice, then stilled, and Solveig, watching from the doorway, said softly, "It's time." In the center of the village stood the stone ring of echoes, 10 wide stones, each carved with an ancient symbol no one could translate anymore. Only felt no one had entered the ring since the long winter. Not because it was forbidden, but because one only entered it when they needed to, and now Leaf stepped into the ring. Children lined the circle, holding breath like birds in a storm. Elders bowed their heads. Sigurd brought no flame. Solveig brought no song. They brought only space. Leaf stood in the center, eyes closed, hands open. He did not sing, he did not speak, he did not even breathe. It seemed then one note, not from his mouth, not from his throat. From within the stones, a low, trembling hum. It vibrated through the ground, up their legs, into their bones. Another note joined it, softer, wider, then another, until the whole ring sang. Not a melody, not a tune, but a memory. They saw Leaf as a baby, cradled in silence, heard the wind pause when he was born, felt the earth turn its ear toward him and understood. Leaf had not been silent. The world had simply been listening to him all this time. The notes rose, like frost lifting into morning fog, and then dash stopped. No end, no finale, just stillness, filled with meaning. Leaf opened his eyes, tears streaming down his cheeks, not from sorrow, but from release. He walked to Sigurd and Solveig, took their hands, and whispered, "I didn't know. My song was made of silence." From that day forward, whenever someone in the village felt lost, truly lost, like snow with no tracks behind, they didn't seek words or music. They sat with Leaf dots, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days, and he said nothing, did nothing. But when they left, they always walked lighter, as if carrying less dot, or perhaps more of the right thing. One morning, a traveler came, a merchant with 1,000 tales and 3 golden drums. He asked to hear the boy's empty song. "I've heard lullabies from the eastern isles," he boasted, "and the wind harps of the far fjords." Leaf said nothing. The man grew impatient. He stamped, he clapped, he shouted still dash. Nothing finally, he scoffed. A fraud. He turned to go, but stumbled, fell to his knees, and wept, without knowing why. He never returned, but left behind one of his golden drums. Not as payment, as thanks. It hangs now in the listening hall, untouched, untuned, because its silence reminds them of Leaf's greatest gift, a song that needs no sound to be heard. Years passed, children grew, fires dimmed, but Leaf never changed. He simply became like stone, like stars, like the pause before dawn, and someday, when the village is only a breath, in time the wind will still carry his song, not with music, but with memory, and the world will still be listening. In the northernmost reach of the valley, where even pine trees forgot how to grow, there was a glacier, no name, no path, just a wall of ice, older than language, older than memory, and within it, trapped beneath 1,000 winters, was a single red thread, not yarn, not blood, a thread of flame, and it dreamed, not like people, dreamed not with images or voices, but with presence. It remembered fire, it remembered touch, it remembered Sigurd. For years, the villagers knew of the glacier, but no one approached. It wasn't fear, it was respect. For the ice wasn't silent, it whispered late at night. When the auroras curled across the stars like breathing sky serpents, the glacier would hum. No melody, just vibration like forgotten thunder buried under snow. And the elders would say, the ice remembers when it burned. One winter, the flame in the village dimmed, not out of neglect, but of weariness. It still warmed, still glowed, but softly, weakly, like it was. Missing something, Sigurd saw it first, then Salvig, then Leaf the boy with the silent song, and all. 3 turned northward. They did not go alone. 4 others joined them. Torun, who once listened to the stars. Eirik, who forged plows from fallen meteorite. Ilsa, who had never spoken, but whose laughter fed the village. And Oren, whose left eye saw things 3 seconds before they happened. Together, they formed the Circle of 7. Not by title, but by trust. Their journey was not harsh. The wind was gentle, the sky clear, as though even the land knew it was time for 3 days and nights. They walked, Leaf never spoke. Toron mapped the constellations on birch bark as they shifted. Ilsa melted snow, with her hands alone, and always just ahead. The glacier waited, not growing, not retreating, just waiting. On the 4th dawn, they arrived. It loomed like a sleeping god, silent, infinite, unknowable, and yet ... The red thread was clear ... thin as hair ... glowing ... inside the ice. Woven like lightning in glass, Sigurd placed his hand on the ice. It did not sting, did not freeze. It was warm, not in temperature, in memory, as if the glacier recognized him, as if it had waited for this exact moment for 1,000 years. Then the ice spoke, not with words, but with feeling. A pulse through the bones, a message in warmth. You left me. Sigurd's eyes welled, not from cold, but from truth. I didn't know, you did. The glacier pulsed again, this time to all 7. Each felt it differently. Ilsa laughed and cried. Oren blinked and saw himself as a boy, breaking a promise he'd never spoken aloud. Torun fell to her knees, clutching the stars on her parchment. The thread inside the glacier flared, bright burning, then dimmed. Leaf stepped forward. He didn't touch the ice. He sang no sound, just breath, just silence, wrapped in presence, and the glacier melted, not into water, but into memory. Chunks of ice, crashing, not violent but like petals in snow, revealing not emptiness, but a door A simple stone door with one rune. Inheritance, Sigurd stepped through. So did Soul, Veig. So did the others, inside a cavern of fire. But no heat, only light. The red thread floated in the air like smoke made solid. It wrapped around them, not binding, not restraining, but welcoming. And then they remembered not their memories, but the glaciers. A village buried under ash. A boy casting his first flame into snow. A tree that grew backwards. From branch to root, a promise broken by fire and rebuilt by silence. Sigurd wept, not for loss, but for all that had been carried. The glacier had not imprisoned the flame. It had protected it, dreamed with it, waited for it to return home. Leaf placed both hands on the thread. It pulsed, then vanished. Not gone, returned to the village, to the central flame. Every hearth that still held a flicker. They emerged from the cavern as snow began to fall. The glacier no longer hemmed, no longer whispered, it simply rested. And where the red thread had once glowed, now shimmered soft moss, growing alive. When they returned to the village, no one asked what had happened. They felt it in their fire, in their dreams, in the hush between words. The glacier still sleeps to this day. But if you go and press your ear to its surface, you may still hear it dreaming of warmth, of stories, of us far to the west, beyond fjords sharp as broken horns, where gulls cried like prophets and the wind bore no name. Lay the grey sea. It had no harbour, no map, no shore that stayed the same. And in its heart, hidden beneath centuries of waves and hush, rested a secret, one so old the stars forgot it, one so quiet that even the tides bowed around it. The villagers had always known the sea was strange. Fish would leap from one side, already salted. Whales swam in figure eights when no one watched, and on stormless nights you could hear singing, soft, like lullabies braided into mist, but never in words. Salvig had dreamed of the sea since she was a child, not as a sailor, not as a wanderer, but as someone the sea remembered. She would wake with salt on her lips, shells in her pocket, and once, sea, glass shaped like an eye. So when the flame began to hum at midnight, one long tone, low and round, she knew, the sea is ready. Sigurd didn't question her. He gathered bread, cloth, 3 carved oars, and a bell that had never been rung. Leif came too, of course, and so did old Brenna, who hadn't left the village in 20 winters, but whose boots still remembered how they took the boat with no name, because, as Solveig whispered, names sink when the sea wants silence. They rode under a moon that pulsed like a heartbeat. The water shimmered gold, though no sun touched it. Leif dipped his fingers into the tide. It sang, not loud, just enough for the boat to drift without effort. After 2 days, they reached the Vale. Line, a perfect boundary in the sea, like glass meeting smoke. Beyond it, the world dimmed. Not darker, just quieter. They crossed without a word. Then the fog came. Not thick, not blinding, but full of memory. Shapes moved within it. Not threats, moments. A woman brushing seaweed from her daughter's hair. A man teaching a seal to carry messages. A child standing on water as if it were stone. The boat passed through each as if moving through breath. On the 3rd night, a sound emerged, not from the sea, from beneath it, a deep, slow chord, like stone being remembered. Then a voice, not human, not beast, but unmistakably alive. You left something in me. The sea, speaking, through the fog, through the salt, right into the chest. Solveig stood. No fear, only recognition. I know. Do you want it back? No, she said. Then why? Come. She smiled and pointed to Leaf. The boy stepped forward, holding a small object wrapped in wool. A shell, but not from this world. Smooth as pearl dot, heavy as thought, it pulsed in his hand. He dropped it into the sea. No splash, only stillness. Then the waves parted, not like Moses in tales, but slowly, like a curtain of time being drawn. And in the opening, they saw her, a woman made of sea, not water, not foam, but of tide and memory and hush. Her eyes were tide pools, her breath the slow pull of the moon. She looked at Solveig. You were my daughter once. Solveig bowed, not in surprise, but in peace. And you kept my voice, always. From her chest, the woman drew a single note. Clear, cold, cold, endless. It rose into the sky, shaped a ring of clouds, and fell right into Solveig's mouth. She sang for the first time since she was 6. No words, no. Melody, just truth. The sea listened, then folded itself back. The woman faded, her smile like wind on wave dot, and the opening closed, not locked, just resting as if it might open, again in another lifetime. When they returned, the village flame danced higher, not because of warmth, but because of depth, and Solveig, she sang only. Once a year after that, on the night the sea fog returned, and everyone would gather, holding lanterns made of shell and silence, and listen, because some secrets are not meant to be shouted, only shared. Long before the village was built, before Sigurd, before flame met frost, there was the cave without echo. No one knew who found it first, or who lost it. It wasn't on any map. It didn't hide, but only those who carried a question could find it, and only those who truly listened could enter. One morning, a child came running down from the western ridge. She had no shoes, no voice, just a smooth, flat stone in her hand. It was warm, carved with 3 runes. The elders gasped when they saw it, for those were the runes of Ilkra, the forgotten. Name, the one never spoken aloud since the last flame singer vanished. Into mist, Sigurd looked at the stone for a long time, then turned to Leaf. It's time. They travelled with only what they could carry. Sigurd brought a branch that had never burned. Solveig wore the cloak woven by 3 winter's worth of SNOWMELT. Leaf brought nothing, but his footsteps knew where to go. They crossed rivers that moved backwards, climbed ridges where ravens whispered in pairs, and after 2 days they stood before it, a dark open mouth in the mountain, wide enough to swallow a whale, low enough to make you bow as they entered. Sigurd touched the stone arch with his fingertips. It hummed, not in song, but in recognition inside. The air was still, no wind, no drip. Even their breaths seemed to vanish, taken, not echoed. Every step felt private, every whisper absorbed. Torches would not light, not even Leaf's soft flame spark. But they weren't blind. The cave glowed from within. Not bright, but true, like memory resting just under the skin. The path bent, then twisted, then disappeared, not into wall, but into openness. They stepped into a massive chamber, a dome of pure stone, so smooth it reflected. No sound, no bird could sing there. No flame could crackle. Even hearts beat quieter. And in the center stood a single object, a mirror carved from obsidian, tall as a man, framed in ice. Sigurd approached first. He looked, then fell to his knees. Not in pain, not in joy, in understanding. He had seen not his face, but every promise he had broken, every time he'd said, later, and never returned. The mirror did not accuse. It remembered Solveig went next. She looked, and saw not herself, but the first flame she'd ever lit. Small, afraid, wanting to disappear, and how it had begged her to stay. She wept, but smiled, and whispered, I stayed. Leaf approached last, and in the mirror he saw nothing. Just stillness. No face, no face, no memory, just ... Space. He reached out, touched the surface, and the mirror melted not into water, into voice. 1,000 voices, whispers, shouts, songs, all the sounds the cave had swallowed for centuries. They rushed out, into the chamber, through the stones, up the passage, out the mountain, and across the land, in the village. Children dropped spoons in awe. Fires flared, the sea rippled, even the glacier stirred, because sound had returned. Back in the cave, Leaf stood alone, the mirror gone, but on the wall behind him, where no carving had ever been, a new rune burned. Ansu's breath, speech, divine inspiration, closing parenthesis. Closing parenthesis, Sigurd read it aloud. For once, his voice echoed, just once, then faded, as they left the cave. The silence did not return. The cave had offered its echo again, not as a trick, but as a gift. A reminder that sometimes, silence is not absence, but a vessel waiting to be filled. They walked back to the village, wind in their ears for the first time in days. Birdsongs sounded brighter, laughter echoed deeper, and in the center of the village, the flame leaped as if it had heard something beautiful at last. The stone the child had found. It crumbled the moment they returned, its job done, and from that day on, whenever someone in the village couldn't find their voice, they were led to a small hollow in the western ridge, where the echo now always waits, patient, listening, ready. Asterisk winter came early that year. The snow arrived not as storm, but as silence. One morning, the sun rose. It touched the mountains with frost-blue light, then did not rise again, not that day, not the next, not for 20 nights. No storm, no cloud, just dusk. UNMOVING. Unchanged, unbroken. The village did not panic at first. They lit more lamps, told longer stories, baked bread with berries they'd been saving for solstice. But the fire in the village square, it began to flicker, not in weakness, in confusion, as though even flame forgot how to behave when the sky did not turn. Elders murmured, ravens flew in circles, forgetting where to land. Children began to dream with their eyes open, and always, the night remained, on the 6th night without sunrise. The flamekeeper went missing. Her gloves were left on the edge of the fire pit, still warm. Next night, the blacksmith vanished. Then a boy who'd been humming lullabies to himself. No struggle, no footprints, just gone, as if they had melted into shadow. On the 9th night, Sigurd gathered the circle, the same 7 who had crossed glacier and sea. This time, they sat not in circle, but in a spiral, because something was drawing them inward. Solveig said little, but her candle had gone out and refused to relight. Leaf had not spoken in 3 days, not from fear, but from reverence. The night had taken on weight, as though it were watching them, waiting. They chose not to search, outward, but downward, into the roots of the flame. Beneath the village lay old tunnels, carved by those who built the first hearth. Few remembered them, fewer dared walk them, but the circle did, because sometimes the only way through the dark is into it. The tunnels were cold, but dry. The air hummed with memory. Dust glowed faintly, not from magic, but from time. Every breath echoed like footsteps. Every heartbeat felt ancient, and at the end of the 4th passage, a door wood carved with 12 symbols, each one a night, each one different and in. The center, the recess, the thorn, the giant, the force unasked for. They opened it together and stepped into a world with no stars, not blackness, just endless twilight, like a painting half finished. Mountains floated upside down, rivers curled backward through sky, and in the middle a single tower, made of shadow shaped like stone. It hummed, not evil, not welcoming, just waiting inside. The walls whispered, "This is the night that would not end," because it was never listened to. Sigurd climbed first, no stairs, only thought, each level. Told the truth, the first night was born lonely. The second night dreamed of being light. The third tried to sing, but no ears dared stay awake. And so the nights stacked, each one longer, sadder, quieter, until they stopped trying, and simply remained at the top of the tower, stood a throne, empty, woven of silence. Salvig approached. Reaching into her cloak, she pulled out a single ember, one they had saved from the day. The sun last rose, and placed it on the throne. The tower breathed, not air but light, from every shadow. Figures emerged, those who had vanished, not lost, just kept by the night, protected, preserved, waiting for someone to hear the silence, to honor it. Leaf stepped forward, his voice quiet. "We're not here to end the night. We're here to remind it is seen." The tower sighed and began to dissolve, gently, like a story told for the last time, as they stepped outside. The sky stirred, not with brightness, but with a deep, ancient grey dot, soft as ash dot, warm as fur, and on the horizon, a line of gold, not the sun, but the promise of it. The villagers woke as if from dream. The missing returned. The flame in the square rose high, slow and steady, not in joy but in balance. And from that year on, they celebrated not the sunrise, but the longest night. They called it the listening, a time not of fear, but of hush, where stories are told without words, and everyone sits, just to feel the quiet. The snow had melted, but the trees had not returned. Spring had passed, then summer too, but the forest near the village remained still. No buds, no songbirds, no rustle of life, just quiet trees, not dead, not asleep, just watching. Elders whispered of the Hjortskoga, the antlered forest, named not for deer, but for what lived beneath the roots. A guardian dot, older than gods, wiser than names. Some called it Hjorta, others called it the god who does not move. But Sigurd, he remembered the name carved once in bark, long ago, when he was still a boy Vehorn. One morning, footprints appeared in the snowless forest floor, not human, not beast's dot crescent, dash-shaped, heavy tearful, each print filled with water, though no rain had fallen, and at the edge of the forest, a stag stood, enormous, antlers wider than boats, eyes like dark sap, and on its brow, a flame, small, UNMOVING. The stag did not speak. It only turned, slowly, and stepped back into the woods, leaving a path where no path had ever been. Salvig stepped forward. Sigurd stopped her. "It's not showing you the way," he said. "It's asking if you're ready." So they prepared, not with swords, but with stories. Each member of the circle shared one secret aloud, a memory they had never spoken, sorrow they had never named. They left behind bread, not to eat, but to let the forest remember their warmth. And then they entered. The Hjortskoga was alive. In a different way. Each step had weight. Each leaf had breath. The trees did not bend with wind, but with will. The deeper they walked, the older they felt. Leaf swore he saw a face in a knot of oak. Sigurd touched. Bark that pulsed. Solveig felt her own name echoed from tree to tree. Dot not spoken, just known at sunset, though the sky never showed above the canopy. They arrived at the glade. Dot round dot stone dash ringed in the center. An altar made not by hands, but by time. Roots had grown into throne. Moss had shaped into runes, and around it sat the god. Bayhorn antlers like frozen rivers, eyes that reflected stars that had never existed, breath like the space between drum beats. It didn't move, but the forest did. Branches swayed, though no wind blew. Leaves fell, though no tree shed, and each sound came with meaning. Sigurd stepped forward, knelt. He opened his hands. Inside, a single branch, taken from the flame tree in the village square. Still, warm, still whispering. "We seek balance," Sigurd said, "between old and new, between stillness and fire." The horn did not answer, but the flame on its brow flared once. Solveig stepped forward. She did not kneel. She placed her hands on the earth, whispered in a voice made of breath alone, "We do not wish to tame, only to listen." Again, no reply, but the moss at her feet bloomed. Softly, quietly, Leaf came last. He did not speak. He simply stared into the god's eyes, and Vehorn blinked once, as if to say, "I see you." Then the god stood, not fast, not slow, just inevitably it walked past them. Each step, quiet, but shaking every branch. It stopped at the edge of the glade, lowered its head and scraped its antlers against the ground, once, twice, 3 times. Where it had marked, fire grew, but not like village flame. This was green fire, alive, dancing without smoke. It spread in a circle, warm, gentle, then lifted into the air, and from above, a rain of seeds, each glowing, each humming, each carrying remembered breath. The trees responded, leaves unfurled, roots stretched. The forest exhaled for the first time in 100 years, and Vihern, the antlered god, stepped back into the trees, not vanishing, simply becoming part of them again. As the circle walked back, the path did not close behind them. It remained welcoming, trusting, and in their hands. Each carried a small orb of green fire to light not homes, but hearts in the village. The trees began to grow closer, not in threat, but in kinship. Children climbed, branches where none had grown the day before. Birdsong returned, and from that season forward, the Festival of Leaves was born, not to honor the forest, but to listen to it Because sometimes the most ancient gods ask for no temple, only respect. Asterisk, they heard the horns at dawn, but not from the sea, not from the mountains, from beneath. A single note, long and low, rising from under the earth like smoke. Then another, then silence. Not a threat, a summon. Sigurd stood at the edge of the village square, eyes narrowed toward the hills. They'd known this day might come for generations. The Skelder had slept, an ancient clan who once lived under the mountain, makers of Stygian songs, keepers of cold fire. But they were wronged, long ago, forgotten, buried, but not extinguished, and now they had risen. 3 nights later, a figure arrived, tall, wrapped in bark and bone, not a warrior, a messenger. Their voice was rough as dry leaves. The Skelder do not ask. The Skelder claim, a pause. This land was once ours. The mountain gave us fire. You took it, you burned it. Now we return. They left behind a stone knife, still, warm, not from heat, from memory. The village didn't panic, but fear took root. Children no longer played after dusk. Even the flames in hearts burned lower, as if listening. The circle gathered, not to plan for war, but to ask if it had to happen. Sigurd remembered the mirror in the cave without echo, how truth had reflected, not accused. He looked at the flame tree in the center of the square, still glowing with green fire from the forest's gift, and he said, "We meet them, not with swords, but with something older." So they walked down the mountain path, past the river that hummed their names, into the stone corridors, carved before language, the caves of the Skeldok. No torches needed. Every wall glowed with slow pulse. Like veins of memory, Salvig whispered. They're not waiting for us to fight. They're waiting to see if we remember. At the deepest chamber, the Skelder stood, not in lines, but in a circle, mirroring the circle from the village. An elder stepped forward, face carved by time, eyes hollow, but not empty. He held a chunk of cooled magma, smooth, shaped like a heart. This was once our bond. We gave it to the first firekeepers, and it was forgotten. He placed it on the ground. Take it, and the war begins. Leave it, and walk away forever. Sigurd knelt. He did not touch the stone. He reached into his cloak, and drew out the green flame given by Vehorn, the Antlod. God. It pulsed, not with heat, but with listening. He placed it beside the magma heart, and said, "This is not fire. This is memory, burned not from trees, but from truth." The chamber darkened, then brightened. The stone walls rippled, as if breathing, and a sound filled the space. A single tone, not voice, not instrument, just resonance. Then the elder wept silently, and picked up the heart of magma, held it in both hands, and placed it beside the green. Fire, both burned together, one pulsing warm, one pulsing wild, and at last the elder said, "No war today, not because you begged, but because you remembered us." The Skelder stepped forward, not as victors, not as conquered, but as kin, one by one. They removed their Bonenbark armor, revealing robes beneath, etched with the same runes that hung above the village gates, the same flame sigils. They had never truly been different, only forgotten. From that day forward, every festival included the stone songs sung with Skelder rhythm and village verse, and the magma heart was placed in the middle of the square. Never taken, never owned. Just shared. The children born after would ask, Why do we celebrate a war that never happened? And the elders would smile, lighting anew fire each year with both green flame and cold spark, and say, because every war avoided is a victory sung by all sides. Years passed, not loudly like rivers do, but quietly, like mist that settles over grass before dawn. Sigurd grew older, not weaker, just slower. His beard turned white, not like snow, but like ash. He still tended the flame, still walked the forest. Paths. Still watched the sky for omens, but he smiled more, spoke less, because the fire within him had learned, sometimes. Silence carries farther than shouting. Salvig became the new keeper of the green flame. She taught the children how to light it, not with flint or spark, but with a story, and only those who listened fully, no interrupting, no rushing, could make it glow. Some thought it was magic, others knew better. It was a tension leaf, disappeared into the northern hills one spring, not lost, just gone. He left behind a stone bowl filled with water inside, floating a seed, still glowing faintly green. The village changed. Slowly houses were rebuilt in curves, not lines, echoing forest paths. Every third fire was left unattended, not out of carelessness, but trust. And once each year, at the first snow, everyone gathered not to speak, but to sit around the old flame tree, around the magma heart, around the silence. One morning, Sigurd woke and knew. Today was the last day. He would carry the ember. He did not fear. He did not rush. He dressed in his thickest wool, carved his walking stick, not from oak, but from ashwood, and placed a small bundle, wrapped in deer hide, into his pouch. Inside it, one ember dot from the flame that never died. He walked past the river that hummed through the listening forest, up the path where the Skelder once stood, and beyond, higher than wind, colder than memory, until he reached a peak no one had named. There he sat. The world lay below him, the village tiny, the flame tree a flicker, the forest a breath, and above sky, not empty, but vast. He unwrapped the ember, held it in his palm. It did not burn, it did not fade, it just waited, like it always. Had Sigurd closed his eyes and spoke not to gods, not to ghosts, but to the flame itself? You were never mine, only with me. Now, be with someone else. And he set the ember on a stone, not buried, just placed in view, so that anyone who truly looked might find it. He smiled once, then lay back, and let the wind sing the lullaby. Days passed, snow fell, then melted, seasons turned. Children climbed the peak, some came for fun, some came for legend, some never knew why they came, but all of them, at some moment, saw a small stone, and, when they reached for it, felt a warmth, not hot, just enough to remember. And so, the flame continued, not in hearths, not in temples, but in stories, told before sleep, whispered around firelight, or carried quietly in hearts who had learned to listen, because fire does not die, it becomes a promise, a pause, a presence. And in the land of snow and forest, where gods walk like shadows, and songs echo through silence, a name was still spoken, not shouted, not chanted, just gently callen, Sigurd, the one who listened, the one who listened, the one who carried the flame, until it no longer needed to be carried.